The verdict had just come in and I was still sitting in the courtroom long after everyone else had filed out. The bailiff gave me a polite nod. He knew who I was, knew what this case had cost me, and I nodded back without really seeing him. 2 years. That's how long it took to get Ryan Webb into a courtroom and watch a jury look him dead in the eye and say, guilty. All counts. I walked out into the afternoon heat of Atlanta and stood on the courthouse steps, loosening my tie. I had nowhere to be. The kids were with my parents in Marietta. My hotel room was paid through the weekend. For the first time in 2 years, I had absolutely nothing I needed to do, and I didn't know what to do with that. Marcus. I turned. Leaning against the stone railing, arms crossed, was a woman in a dark blazer with a press badge clipped to the lapel. It took me a second. The hair was shorter, the lines around her eyes were new, but then it clicked. Claire? She smiled. In the flesh, you look terrible, by the way. I laughed. A real one. Hadn't done that in a while. Claire Novak. We'd known each other since we were freshmen at Georgia Tech, part of the same tight group of 4 friends who spent more time on the roof of our dorm building than in class. She'd gone into journalism. I'd gone into structural engineering. We'd lost touch somewhere around year 3 of my marriage, the way you lose touch with people when life gets loud. You were in there? I asked. Back row. Every day this week. She pushed off the railing and walked toward me. I'm covering the Webb case for the Atlanta Journal. My editor's been on it since the indictment. She hesitated. I saw you testify on Thursday. I'm sorry, Marcus. For all of it. I stared out of the street. A cab honked. A pigeon ignored it. I'm doing a long-form piece, she said carefully. Not a headpiece, not clickbait. A real account. What happened to your family deserves to be told properly, and I'd rather it be me than someone who doesn't know you. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a card. I'm not going to push. But if you want to talk, you know I'll get it right. I held the card without looking at it. A year ago, I would have said no without thinking. But I'd been approached by 6 other reporters since the arrest, and none of them had bothered to learn my kids' names before sitting down across from me. Claire knew my kids' names. She'd asked about them on Thursday after I stepped off the stand, and it had stopped me cold. Where are you staying? I asked. The Marriott on Cortlandt. Same block as mine. I pocketed the card. Buy me a coffee and I'll think about it. She bought me a coffee and I'll think about it. She bought me a coffee. I talked for 4 hours. By the time we were done, she'd gone through half a legal pad and I'd agreed to let her follow up over the weekend at my parents' house in Marietta if my kids were comfortable with it. She drove. I talked. The highway west out of the city was empty for a Friday evening, and I watched the skyline shrink in the side mirror while I tried to figure out where to begin. Start wherever it makes sense, Claire said. That's the problem. I've been trying to figure out where it started for 2 years, and I still don't have a clean answer. I leaned back. You remember Ryan, right? Right, from school? Your brother. Yeah. Big guy. Played lacrosse. That's him. I paused. He was my best man. Claire kept her eyes on the road. She didn't say anything, which was why I'd always liked her. My wife's name was Diana. We met at a company event when I was 29. She was a project coordinator for a development firm that hired my engineering company on a mixed-use build in Buckhead. She was organized, funny, had this way of walking into a room and immediately knowing where everything was. I thought that was the most attractive quality a person could have. I proposed 14 months later. My brother Ryan drove down from Charlotte to celebrate with us. He hugged Diana so hard she laughed and said he was going to crack a rib. We got married on a Saturday in October 7 years ago. Ryan was standing right next to me when Diana came down the aisle. I remember looking over at him and thinking I was the luckiest person alive, married to a woman I loved, my brother at my side, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. I left for a 14-month project in Phoenix 8 months after the wedding. Diana stayed in Atlanta. The commute back was brutal. Every third weekend if I was lucky. But we talked every day. Ryan checked in on her, which I appreciated. He lived 45 minutes away. I texted him sometimes, hey, can you swing by? She mentioned the water heaters acting up. He always said yes. Our son was born while I was still based out of Phoenix. I flew back the moment Diana called. Held him in the hospital that night while she slept. Dark hair, my forehead, her chin. We named him Daniel. 11 months later, after I'd come home and gone back to working local projects, our daughter was born. Lily. Same dark hair, same wide eyes. I didn't question it. Why would I? The first thing I noticed, and it's embarrassing to say this out loud, was a receipt. I was grabbing an old jacket from the hall closet to donate, and a receipt fell out of one of Diana's coat pockets. Dinner at a restaurant in Virginia Highland. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine. The date was a Tuesday night in March. I'd been home that night. We'd ordered pizza and watched something on Netflix, and Diana had gone to bed early saying she had a headache. I stood in the hallway for a long time looking at that receipt. Maybe it was old, I thought. Maybe she'd worn the coat somewhere before and forgotten to clean out the pockets. Maybe there was a totally normal explanation. I put the receipt back in the pocket and didn't say anything. But I started paying attention. 2 weeks later, Diana mentioned she was going to her friend Gwen's house on a Saturday afternoon. Gwen and Diana had been close since college. I'd met her twice. Liked her fine. Nothing unusual. I took the kids to my parents' place for lunch and came back around 4. Diana's car was gone. I texted Gwen about something unrelated. I was looking for a contractor she'd mentioned once, and Gwen texted back within minutes. She asked how Diana was doing. Said she hadn't seen her in weeks. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I didn't confront Diana. I'm an engineer. I solve problems by gathering data first, and I wasn't willing to blow up my family based on a receipt and a miscommunication that might have an explanation I hadn't thought of. So I started gathering. I put a small GPS tracker on Diana's car, not to spy on her relationship, I told myself, but to understand her patterns. Within 2 weeks, I had a clear picture of 3 regular Tuesday and Saturday trips to an address in Decatur that I didn't recognize. I drove past it once on a Wednesday morning. A nice townhouse, gray siding, small front garden. I ran the address through the county property records. Ryan Webb. My brother. I pulled over. I sat in my truck on a quiet street in Decatur and stared at my phone until my hands stopped shaking. Then I drove home, kissed my kids, made dinner, and didn't say a word. I contacted a DNA testing service the following week. A client of mine in the medical industry had used them for legal purposes. They were discreet, thorough, court admissible. I collected samples from Daniel and Lily on a Tuesday morning while Diana was at the gym. Told them we were doing a family health project, which wasn't entirely a lie. I mailed the samples that afternoon. While I waited, I did something else. I hired a forensic accountant. Diana and I had a joint business account. She handled coordination for a small property management side business we'd started together 3 years ago. I'd handed over most of the financial management to her because she was better at it than me. The accountant came back to me in less than 2 weeks. Between the business account and a personal savings account I hadn't monitored closely, roughly $340,000 had been moved over 4 years. Small amounts, never enough to trigger flags. Steady. Methodical. The DNA results came on a Thursday. Ryan Webb, 99.97% probability of paternity for both children. I read the report 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, went outside, and sat on the back steps until it got dark. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, how long had it been going on? Since the wedding, as far as I can tell, I said. Maybe before. I found out later that they dated briefly in college, before I ever met Diana. She said it ended, Ryan said it ended, and I had no reason to think otherwise. I looked out the window. The highway had given way to surface roads, the low amber light of suburban Atlanta. 7 years. Daniel is 5, Lily is 4. Did you go to a lawyer? First thing the next morning. His name was Howard Garrett, an attorney out of Sandy Springs who specialized in family law and financial fraud. I walked into his office with the DNA results, the bank records, and 3 weeks of GPS logs. He looked at everything for about 20 minutes without saying a word. Then he said, I want you to understand something before we go further. The financial piece is actually the more actionable case right now. What your wife did. Systematic diversion of jointly owned funds over multiple years. That's civil fraud at minimum, potentially criminal. The family law side is complicated because of the kids, but the financial exposure is significant. What about my brother? I asked. He looked at me carefully. Was he a signatory on any of the accounts? No. Did he receive any of the transferred funds directly? I hadn't thought to check that. I told Howard I'd get back to him. The forensic accountant dug deeper. It took another week. When he came back, he had a trail of transfers from Diana's personal account to a joint account I'd never known about, held in both Diana's and Ryan's names at a bank in Charlotte. Over 4 years, just over $190,000 had moved into that account. I called Howard from my truck in a parking garage because I didn't trust myself to sit still anywhere enclosed. Okay, he said when I told him. Now we have a case against both of them. He filed for divorce on grounds of fraud and dissipation of marital assets. A protective order was obtained simultaneously, keeping Diana from accessing any remaining shared accounts. Howard contacted the Fulton County DA's office about the financial transfers. Within 3 weeks, both Diana and Ryan were under investigation. I told the kids their parents were having some problems and they'd be staying with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. Daniel asked if it was because he'd broken a lamp. I held him for a long time and said no, and it took everything I had, not to cry right there in my parents' living room. I told my parents the truth that same evening. My father sat at the kitchen table and didn't speak for a long time. My mother put her hand over her mouth. Then my father said, very quietly, "I want to talk to Ryan." I said that wasn't a good idea right now. He looked at me and nodded. He's a practical man, my father. He grieved it quietly and then he put his arm around me and said, "We're not going anywhere." My mother said, "Those are still my grandchildren. Nothing changes that." I almost lost it then. I held it together until I got to my car. The confrontation with Ryan happened in Howard's conference room, which was probably the safest place for it. Ryan arrived with his own attorney, which told me he already knew what was coming. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in a month. He sat across the table from me, and for the first few seconds neither of us said anything. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Marcus." I looked at him for a long time. This was the person who drove 4 hours to be at my college graduation, who helped me move into my first apartment, who called me every week when our mother had her health scare 2 years ago, who was standing 6 inches to my left when I watched my wife walk down the aisle toward me. "How long before the wedding?" I asked. He looked at the table. 3 months. So when you threw her that engagement party, when you made the toast, when you shook my hand outside the church and told me I was the luckiest man alive, I kept my voice level. You already knew. He didn't answer. "The money," I said. "That was Diana's idea," he started. "Don't." I held up a hand. "Howard has the account statements. Your name is on the account. Whatever story you two built about that, save it for the DA. His attorney put a hand on his arm. I looked at Ryan one more time. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't feel like grief at first. It feels like a structural failure, like something load-bearing has given way and the whole building is still standing. But you know it won't be for long. That's what looking at my brother felt like that day, like watching a collapse in slow motion. I stood up. "I hope whatever you two had was worth it," I said, "because you burned everything else down for it." I walked out without looking back. Claire pulled off the highway and we sat in a Waffle House parking lot while I finished the account. She'd run out of room on her legal pad and switched to her phone. The night staff was setting up inside, the warm lights spilling out across the asphalt. Diana was arrested 4 months after I filed for divorce. Ryan was arrested the same morning at his home in Charlotte. The charges were felony theft by conversion, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and in Ryan's case, an additional count of breach of fiduciary trust. Howard had argued successfully that Ryan's role as my business partner on a side project we'd worked together 3 years prior made his participation in the financial diversion a direct breach of that relationship. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that. Howard got me full physical custody, primary legal custody, and a judgment for the full value of the diverted funds plus legal fees. Diana received nothing from the marital estate. The family court judge, a quiet woman from Cobb County who'd clearly seen everything and was not impressed by anything, looked at Diana during the final hearing and said, "I've been on the bench for 19 years. This is one of the more deliberate betrayals I've encountered." Then she stamped the papers. I sat in the hallway afterward and couldn't move for about 10 minutes. Ryan accepted a plea on the fraud charges. He would serve 22 months, forfeit his share of the account, and pay restitution. Diana's trial ran the following spring. She chose not to plea, and the jury convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 4 years. The part I keep coming back to is Daniel and Lily. I had one conversation with a child psychologist before I talked to them. I needed to know how to frame it, what language to use, how much was appropriate for a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old to carry. The psychologist told me the truth always comes out eventually, and children are better served by an honest foundation, delivered with love and age-appropriate language, than by a lie they'll have to unlearn later. So I sat with them at my parents' kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in November. Daniel had a glass of chocolate milk. Lily was holding a stuffed rabbit named Gerald that she'd had since she was 18 months old. I told them that sometimes families change shape, and that their mom and I weren't going to be living together anymore. I told them that I loved them more than I could ever put into words. And I told them, as simply and honestly as I could, that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they love, and that none of that was ever, in any way, their fault. Daniel looked at me very seriously and said, "Are you still our dad?" I had to take a breath before I answered. "Always," I said. "Nothing changes that. Not ever." He nodded like this settled something important. Then he took a drink of his chocolate milk and asked if we could watch a movie. Lily climbed into my lap and stayed there for most of Toy Story. I tell that story every time someone asks me how I'm holding up, because that's the honest answer. I'm holding up because of those 2 kids and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald. Claire closed her notes app and looked at me. We'd been sitting in the parking lot long enough that the night crew had fully taken over inside and a trucker had pulled in and ordered a full meal and finished it. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "You've heard everything else. Are you okay?" "Not for the article. Just, are you?" I thought about that for a moment. Really thought about it. "I had coffee last week with a woman I've known since college," I said. "Her name is Priya. She's a pediatric nurse. She makes an incredible sommelier, and she laughs at things I say even when they're only moderately funny. We've had coffee 3 times in the last month." I looked out of the parking lot. "I think I'm going to ask her to dinner." Claire smiled. "Yeah. The kids met her once. She came over to drop off a book she borrowed from me back in 2018. Lily showed her Gerald. Priya knew the rabbit's name within about 4 minutes, and that was apparently the test, because Lily has asked about her twice since." Claire laughed. "A real one." "I don't know what it'll be," I said. "I'm not in a hurry. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not dreading the future, and that feels like something." We drove the rest of the way to Marietta mostly in silence. My parents' house was lit up when we pulled in, and through the front window I could see the blue flicker of a TV and the silhouette of my father in his armchair. Claire parked at the curb and I sat for a moment before getting out. "Thank you," I said, "for asking. Thank you for trusting me with it." I went inside. Daniel ran at me from the living room and hit me at approximately knee height. Lily followed close behind, Gerald dangling from one hand. My mother was already talking about dinner from the kitchen. My father muted the TV and raised an eyebrow at me. The silent, paternal question, "You okay?" I gave him a small nod. He unmuted the TV. I sat on the floor with my kids and we watched the end of whatever movie they'd started, and Daniel fell asleep against my arm. And Lily explained to me in a serious whisper that Gerald had also had a long day. I said I could tell, and covered him with a corner of the blanket, and she nodded, satisfied. The trial wrapped up on a Thursday. Ryan is serving his time at a federal facility in North Carolina. Diana appealed her sentence and lost. The $340,000 judgment has been partially collected. Howard says the rest will come in time. I went back to work 2 months ago. I'm on a bridge rehabilitation project in DeKalb County, early mornings. Cold coffee, good crew. I come home to my kids every evening. We have dinner at the kitchen table. I ask Daniel about school, and he tells me more about the Minecraft realm he's building with his friend Omar than anything that happened in actual class. Lily insists on telling 1 joke per meal, most of which don't have punchlines so much as an ending she has decided is funny. I laugh every time. Last Saturday I took Priya to dinner. A real one, not coffee, not a casual thing. We went to a restaurant in Inman Park and we talked for 3 hours, and she told me about her year working in a hospital in rural Uganda right after nursing school. And I told her about the first bridge I ever designed that actually got built, and how I drove out to stand on it alone the morning it opened to traffic. She said that was one of the best things she'd ever heard. I said she was one of the best things that had happened to me in a long time. She looked at me across the table and said, "I want you to know I'm not going anywhere." I believed her. There's a line a structural engineer lives by: everything is load-bearing until you prove otherwise. For 7 years, I built my life on supports I hadn't tested, and when I finally applied the load, 2 of them failed catastrophically. It nearly took everything down. But the foundation held. My kids, my parents, the people who showed up when it mattered. I'm rebuilding on tested ground now. It's slower, it's less certain in some ways and more certain in others. But I come home every night to 2 kids who save me a seat on the couch and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald who has, apparently, also had a long day. That's enough. That's more than enough.